Welcome to the Griswold Method. I am here with Dr. Linda Barnum, and I will go ahead and give you a list of her accolades, and then she'll probably correct me on a few of them. But I just found out that an author, and I didn't know that. I knew that she was in therapy and doing therapy and teaching and education, group class work, specifically in lots of trauma work, and she's worked all over the world, I understand, with all types of different cultures and people and things. And so I'm excited to bring a little bit of knowledge base on something that I'm super interested in, and I hope you guys are too, about what she's doing to help the planet. And what she's doing to help the planet is helping people between their ears. And I think that that's a really important place, because that's where everything starts, is between your ears. And if you have been able to help so many people, and the way that I met Dr. Barnum is I have several patients that have been under her care. And I've actually been able to see, before I met you, I've been able to see the change that you've been able to help create in some of those patients. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I have to meet this lady, and maybe I'll be able to catch her on camera and we can do it together, because it's important for me to, when I see somebody whom I care about go through a transition, and then I understand that I see that their energy shifts and changes, and then I find out who helped them do that, I want to know, how did they help them do that? And so thank you for being here with me today, and I appreciate that you just took the time out of your clinical practice and all of the other 9,000 things that you do to be sitting with me on this Friday afternoon.
Well, it's a privilege for me. I really appreciate you inviting me. Thank you. It's an honor. And I think your listeners should know that we do collaborate. That I feel the same, that I like to network with really established practitioners in the community. In my field of psychology and clinical mental health, I know that we've gone past the days of where we just have to do talk therapy. I have to hack into the central nervous system. I've got to figure out what the soma of the body is also saying, because it's keeping the score, right? 100%. And so it takes a village, and I have to work with practitioners that understand how to integrate and bring back health back into the life of an individual. Right, so
you see, what I like her is that neurologically based care. It's what we do at the chiropractic office, and it's what she's doing with all of her clients. And so, just like she said, if we can integrate together, can I downregulate the nervous system from an external input, and can you do it from an internal output? Now we're symbiotic. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And to be totally transparent, that's what the vision of this podcast is even for, is to be able to have local healthcare practitioners that I'm being symbiotic with, that I work with, that I trust and believe in, because I get the benefit to see so many people in a day that we can filter out all the rest. And
well, I think you're also alluding to the fact that there's big trauma, right? There's the cultural trauma, and I'm fascinated in that, and that's what I'll talk about in a minute regarding generational and intergenerational trauma. And then there's the individual imprint of that trauma, the fate of that individual, and how it's shown up in the central nervous system, the neurophysiological, the body, the bones, the blood of who we are, where we came from. And I think as a practitioner, being privileged to have a degree in somatic psychology and studying and taking a deep dive into the trauma and the imprint, it took me into the journey of, well, some of that trauma didn't begin with us, right? And how far back into a family system? Well, is it just this kind of like, Freudian, it's my mommy and daddy issues, right? Right. Or do we take that and interact that with our society, the fate and time of where we are and our birth journeys, whether that's from a cultural, ethnic, right, the history, the generational fate of how we got here. Right. But what if we even have to go back further, that big forces, big fates that humanity is exposed to, war, mass migrations, famines, plagues, you name it, also have an interaction with who we are generationally. Right? If you think of the number of people that it has taken in our legacy, our ancestry, for you and I even to sit here at this table right now, right? And if we would do the math and numbers, going back even just 7 generations, we go back over 500 people.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Well, each of those people have a story, a legacy that we're interacting with, not just in time, place, but epigenetically, how we're being wired. So, right, so we do from a research point of view, we now do have studies that say if I am a descendant from the Holocaust, or if I'm a descendant from a war, the children taken in the situation right now in the Middle East, it's going to have an impact, not only who I am physiologically, neurophysiologically, but some of that impact might show up uniquely in a family system, right? So that who I am may be also experiencing something that really was the fate of my grandparents.
Wow.
Or even their parents. Right. And that all what may end up, say, for example, as alcoholism, say in the family system, we could trace that back to, well, actually my father served in a war. My father couldn't hold the fate of watching people die. He comes back. Society doesn't know how to hold that. My father says, I'm not safe to be around, but I'll choose alcohol. So son says, where's my father? Son doesn't know how to be there for the people that he then is around, right? So we can trace back many different patterns that seem to shapeshift through time and space.
You know, I tend to work in, or maybe I don't even work in it, maybe I believe in sometimes flowers and rainbows. In other words, like I personally am the guy that could be skipping all day long. And I think I'm the compilation of a lot of my generation, my family, for years and years and years. And I bend it, and I have bent it to a place where I think that maybe I look at it from the positive perspective, right? So like grandpa had these great attributes and dad had these great attributes. And of course, those live in me too.
Yes, they do.
But what also is important that I think gets avoided or doesn't get looked at as exact is the other things that you just described. The traumas that happened to granddad still come down. The traumas that happened to grandma, or the migration from a different culture. All of those things.
Yeah. Who's missing? Right, in the family systems. You know, when we look at, if the most common one that as a clinician I see, whether, and it will bring a lot of people to me, is this number one confusion that the child on some level has had to step up and say, I'll be the parent mummy, I'll be the parent daddy, because there's been, for whatever reasons, there's been a absence or inability that the parents are saying, I'm not looking at my children to be there for them because I cannot. Something has taken me from looking and being available. And so I'm looking not at my children, I'm looking behind me, because I'm unlike what you've just described, which is life moving forward. For some people, their fate has been, there's been a disruption. My mother did die at birth. I was given up for adoption. I don't have that grandfather who's put forward a vitality of the masculine to go forward, to be a husband, to be a father, right? To be in right order with life, right? And it's not a victim narrative, though. And I think whoever we are, whatever we come from, this is a very strong affirmation for life, right? Because life still came forward, right?
This perspective, though, right? That has to, you have to be the one that probably has to shift some of that perspective.
You would have to, and you would have to get into right order, that even if your mommy and daddy or your grandparents, so what came before you was a difficult fate. And some fates really are when bad things happen to good people, right? And now there's forces that we're up against in the 21st century that we don't have means to collectively repair in the way we might have done earlier. We don't have some of the community. We don't have some of the ways that we come together. We don't have some of the faith or the rituals or the rhythms that might help us have resolution.
Do you find often that, let's just say you have someone that's like me that that lives in rainbows and unicorns, and and no one does, and I get
magical thinking, Matt. You're confessing aren't live to magical thinking. Okay, that's okay.
But I mean, here's what I'm saying. I mean, the truth is that some of us don't want to go there, and some of us don't want to look back. But I guess the question that I would like to know from you is, what would be a common denominator for somebody that maybe has never examined that you see, and it doesn't have to be totally common, but a common denominator that's like, hey, I've noticed that at this point, I'll give you an example. There are some things in my personal life that I will self-sabotage. It could be a diet, it could be a workout, it could be, and I don't know where that comes from. I don't know what that's about. But there is definitely something that happens for me. Is there a common denominator for people that may have and didn't know that they had generational trauma that's like this? I do check that box. And I do check, and I never looked at it because I don't traditionally look that direction. I try to go eyes forward because that direction sometimes is not very pretty sight.
Right. I love that question because you're right. So there's a couple of things. First of all, if I'm not prepared to actually honor life by looking back,
I love that,
and saying thank you, I agree, right? Then I might put a burden on who comes after me, my own children, right? So now I am directly saying, well, I've got this way of being in the world that I can't attach or receive love, right, because of what may have happened to me. But I'm so wounded I can't go there. So then there are fates that the next generation comes along and says, well, maybe we can do it different, mother, father, right? Because there is something within us, and you'll hear this with parents. Often new parents are the first people that say, hey, I am my mother's daughter, but maybe I could do it different, right? And sometimes it's got to be a big difference. And sometimes it's like, no, it's just going to stay the same. So this X variable, this factor as to who is it that finally says, I want to face life in a way that isn't self-destructive. What am I entangled or reenacting? Maybe our family system in some transmission, some mechanism, whether verbal, non-verbal, genetic, or something in the generational field says, hey, don't ever really succeed. Don't really make sure that you follow that diet because we're a family system atoning for, not quite agreeing to, the right to actually thrive. We're still surviving, don't forget, because we may still feel that the guilt or something from the past hasn't had quite enough resolution. The way that took place, the way that we stole that person's land. Oh yeah, nobody can remember it in the history books, but you go down in a few generations and you see all that wealth may not be actually doing anybody any good.
Right.
So what's going on that there's a breach in how life moves forward? What is it that somebody says, I can't look back there because it's so bad? Well, then I can assure you, your children will like, well, don't worry, Mum, Dad, I'm looking over your shoulder because exactly that is the force that's in me, right? So, okay, so now it's on me, or my brother, my sister, we're going to dissipate that in birth order, right? Or if I'm the only child, well, I get the lion's share of that, right? And it doesn't have to be all this end of the world. It could be, well, hey, the fact that you do come from adversity, I've got to remember that even if you spent, my parents, I never saw my dad. He did, well, the story is, he just ran off and is in prison somewhere. But look at me, how come I've got street smarts? How come there's something in me that can figure out the world that I'm carrying forward, because there's a survival coming through as well, right? The traumatic piece would always be that the ratio, say, of life moving forward or life being limited, right?
Yeah.
Because we've all had generational trauma, because with life comes the fate of experiences which were often from a historical point of view, or just, hey, we happened to be around during 9/11 or COVID, right? There's big events that come either through life, nature, acts of God, right? Or, hey, my parents got killed in a car crash, right? So we've all got some variation on the theme. The idea is, can it be converted so that the central nervous system isn't just in what you're referring to, these hypertonic states of survival that then cue limited cognition, right? Because the brainstem isn't very creative. The brainstem is, am I alive or dead?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Do I kill you or do you kill me?
Survival.
Right. And it doesn't expand very much when it's caught up in traumatic affect, right? Now I can have my personal trauma. I can also have my cultural trauma.
Sure.
Right. So now we're going a little bit macro in it.
Yeah.
Do I have a descendant from this particular fate? Do I have a fate to succeed, or should I align that all of us tribally, we're all still under this?
Yeah.
Right? You can feel that again, and this brings in great relevancy to what we're seeing in our current culture, right? Who has the most trauma and who are going to be the most successful when we're all dealing with, well, where are the resources?
Right.
Who really will survive and have access to them? Right. So this interface, this intersectionality of like Venn diagrams.
Okay. Yeah.
My family system, a traumatic event, but me individually, how am I actually going to be guided to really feel that my family and the force of life is the most potent one for me to negotiate all of those forces around me? Because all of this is an illusion anyway, right?
Right.
It's all socially constructed.
Yes. And what I want to summarize, if you caught that, is early on she had perspective shift from the jump off. What she said there was that it's not looking back to look for the trauma, but to be able to say, I want to honor the life that came before me and the people that came before me. But I also want to acknowledge some of the trauma that maybe has pushed forward and that's now with me. My father's passed, and that's how this podcast ever started, because I wanted to be able to have examples. I held the hand of a man that felt like he didn't finish. His race was over too soon. And so there are things that I see in my own personal life that I've moved to hyperspeed in the past 5 years because of that.
That would create urgency,
It
wouldn't
does.
it?
And what it's also, I need to be aware of the fact of what it creates in my children.
Right.
But that's when my father passed and I became the patriarch of our family, the oldest guy in the family, right?
Yes.
When I made that transition into that, I looked back at how the things that maybe I could have learned, what did I take from dad, what was left over. But I love the idea. Some of the things were given to me and I get to decide whether or not I want to keep them or I would like to get rid of them. And I think that was the essence of what you just kind of explained there.
Right. You know, if we really do honor our mothers and fathers, even if some of us don't even have the fate to have ever met them. But if we know that the gift of life is, yes, thank you, Dad, for that piece, and I get to carry that forward as your son, and then other pieces are not my fate. And in honoring of you, Dad, I don't have to carry that, my father.
Right.
For me to be the man that you wished me to be, and who I wish to be, right? And it's a really honorable journey between your father and you, because the urgency that you're describing that I can feel, and this is when I know where we really are often in right relationship with people around us. If we have guilt, resentment, or something else, we can't feel love so easily, right? If I'm just urgency because I got to do what Dad couldn't do, right? Then not only am I enmeshed in his fate, I'm not truly in alignment with mine, and I will either feel that urgency or a resentment because I'm missing something, which would have been that no matter what, I can carry my father forward, honor him. And I know, and my father would look at his son and say, I'm so proud of you, my son. You've done enough.
If you didn't just catch that, hit the rewind, go back 35, 40 seconds.
Right.
Because the power of that last paragraph that you just said, not only for me, but for you, the listener, like I feel like that there are, sometimes I think that as time goes on, there are things that are passed down, just like you said. There's traumas, and you're honoring of those people, and she just gave you with the clinical relevancy to be able to say, I'm going to take some of these things and I'm going to leave some of those things back there.
Because, yes, they don't belong to you because they're formulated before you were born, right? So trauma, whether it's in our DSM construction of PTSD.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
They don't belong to you because they were transferred or happened to you before you were born.
That's right. So you can't be a victim to it.
That's a powerful statement.
That's right. And therefore you can't be a victim to it. You don't have to perpetuate it or be a perpetrator. If you didn't commit the crime, if you're not the victim in this time and space, and this is something too.
So liberating.
It is. And we think of our construction of PTSD, right, DSM, right, we've got all of what that may look like neurophysiologically now. We see it in the brain, we can see the pathways, blah, 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 right. But again, that's an immediacy in time space. Although it could shapeshift, we could say, well, I got run over by a car like 10 years ago, and my brain stem at a limbic amygdala level still doesn't know that I survived it. So that's my clinical job to do an upgrade and really get that individual correct in time space. Then you go into this other variation of trauma, which is intergenerational. Now you've got a transmission of something that came into the system, the family system, that may have been traumatic, but you still were not there for it. You've got the compensation that your parents may have had or their parents, but again, it's still an adaptation. Some are the healthy adaptations, and that's why we study resilience. It's why we study hope. Right? We look into what are these qualities that can actually come in and give us future pull, right? We understand that. But often I have to look at individuals who are confused or even inflated, because if I think, so I'm going to challenge it, if you thought it was your job to actually take on your father, make sure that he would feel okay because you carried on and did something out of this urgency, you would be looking down to your father by saying, I'm bigger than you, Dad, because you couldn't do it and now I have to. So now you're inflated. Now, if you go into the world and you're bigger than life that gave you life, your parents, right, your dad or your mother, then how can you really receive life? You can't.
Right.
You can't. You can't. You don't know how to pitch for give. You don't know how to pitch for receive, right? So often when there's a confusion where, and sometimes I understand, because family does support family. We have to honor that mammalian tribe, right? I want to be there for you, right? And that's important. That's very important. But often you'll see where somebody's doing it in the wrong position, right? So dad dies. Mum looks down to the son and says, you be the man of the house now. Son immediately has to give up his developmental fate and journey and steps in to be the emotional support. So now he's equal to his mother, right? And now there's no other man can be in that place because he's there, right? And then after a while, he's going to get bigger than his own mother, right? She'll be like, well, my son never listens to me, right? Well, that's not going to help him if he moves forward. Where's the next woman going to come from?
Right.
Right. So we can see disruptions in one of the principles of generational trauma. And we can codify them. And that is often people get out of right order. They're in the wrong position in the family system.
I understand.
And that's very unsafe. The nervous system is not safe if I'm trying to be bigger than my parents, or if I'm even trying to be bigger than a sibling, or if I'm trying to tell my aunt what to do, when really I'm a niece, right? So a lot of the stresses of individuals that I find just on a very rudimentary level, and I would say that if you wanted to think about, you know, some generational forces, not just the, well, who are we? You know, where's our genetic lineage? Where are we? Are we from Russia? Did we come in? Are we Jewish people? Are we like descendants from slaves? Did we cross the border illegally? When and how did we get here? So you can have those stories. And people think that, you know, they have to have a true historical knowledge to understand what these transmissions could be. Most of it's missing. Most of it becomes family legends.
Legends, yeah.
They're not even based in any accuracy, or they're distortions, right? So then we have to, you know, think, well, am I really in right order? That I talk down to my mother, right? I try to parent, or I'm thinking in a way that I'll never be bigger than my dad for me to succeed. Or I'm confused in what that would be like to move forward because my mother did leave me and abandon me, right? Or and I look at my mother and father and it's like they've been married 3 or 4 times each, right? And I don't talk to my sibling, and I've got half siblings, and all of this melting pot that we now understand is the modern, quote, American family, right?
You're correct.
Right.
Totally.
Right. Where are we really, and how do I get back into finding the right place where my nervous system says, yeah, this is where I really have potency and agency, right? I can tell my own children what to do, but I can't tell my parents what to do.
Can you reference the, because I think I understand some of the dynamics of what you're speaking of, but when you say my nervous system can reference, will you go further into that conversation? Are you discussing a certain level of inner peace that reaches when the nervous system reaches a level, or the inner anguish, the palms begin to sweat, and the things?
I've really studied that because I used to wonder about that myself. Like, you know, I study a lot of boundaries, right? You know, where you begin, where you end. And I would notice that, you know, if I try to do something, even within my own family system, or not really listen to the right position, I would actually have anxiety, or it would be very stressful.
Just an incongruency that you can feel within yourself.
Right. And even as a clinician, you know, I've often said, you know, well, that's like where angels fear to tread. You know, I really shouldn't, that's not mine to carry. And as I teach graduate students in clinical mental health, I'm like, now wait a minute. it's very hubris of you to think that you're the healer of this family system. You do realize that that's a very audacious place, and it's very inappropriate for you to look at a client and conclude that their mummy and daddy are bad and horrible, when actually you should be looking at this client with, wow, what incredible life they gave you, and you're the best of them, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so even the novel, our mental health system doesn't always acknowledge and will create these constructions of victimhood or dysfunctionality. Whereas I'm looking at somebody, I'm like, wow, what an incredible example you are of the resilience or these traits from your family system that, yeah, I know it's led you into some substance use disorder, but hey, you're still alive. Not everybody does survive that. Yeah. Wow, what can we look at here? But there's kind of like boundaries that I think if we do go into, it will give us peace of mind, right? After a while, we do have to step back and say, that really isn't my fate. I really learned from this individual, but I don't have the agency of change. I can only just say, wow, my brother, my sister, or my mother, my cousin, I honor you by being the best brother or sister that I could be. But I can't tell you to stop doing your drugs right now, and I'm going to do an intervention, and you've got to be doing this because I need you to get your life together so I can have my life together. Notice how that doesn't work.
No.
And notice that my love for you, I may not even feel my love for you because I'm so angry at resenting you because you're not doing what I want you to do. So if you can sit back and like, wow, as your sibling, and even actually I've had to do this with parents who have adult children. And the adult children are like, well, mom and dad, I'm in my own fate now, right?
Yeah.
And the parents are like, but, right? And I'm like, if you get lost with your guilt, then there's nobody for your child to look to when they do turn to see that you are still there as support.
Yeah.
But if you move into their life, it might actually shift and you're not getting any happier, or your well-being is going down into the fate of somebody else. Right.
And so, in an effort to be totally raw on the podcast, after Dad died, I stepped into a role that I felt very incongruent in. And it's funny that that's exactly what you just discussed. Was I felt so incongruent within my being, which I had no idea which is in my nervous system, and the chiropractor studies the nervous system.
Yeah,
it's heavy.
Right.
And it's interesting that you bring it back to neurophysiology, which I love and have studied many hours on, that I never had realized that it was that I was actually having a neurological response based on an incongruency that I was living out in my real life.
That's it.
Wow.
I literally believe we evolved. We've got such deep tribal ways that are inherent to keep us in right order. Like, don't cross there, don't go there, don't get bigger than your father. Yes, it's right that you honor your father and the gift and the skills that have gone through that and through your mother that allow you to do and be who you are, right? And then it's like, but wait a minute, people are often too big or too small, right? Like, how do I right pitch this?
Yeah.
And then the nervous system is like, the nervous system really doesn't like to be too under or too over. Hyper.
Comfort.
It wants it, right. So it's really good, and I like that we're bringing this together because it's like a parallel. I really do think the nervous system knows how to sustain us in right place. And again, it is really in certain hierarchies, deep boundaries of reality. Right, I'm talking right now in a case I'm working with, because there was tragedy and loss. So brother said, well, I'll take over from where my father, who is no longer alive, our father, my brother. Well, everything in that is not working.
Sure, bumpy.
First of all, the young man is like, well, you can never be my father, so I'll never listen to you. The brother is like, well, you're getting on my nerves because you're not listening to me, so I'm resenting you.
Right.
And they're both missing out the only relationship in absolute reality exists. They can only be brothers. That's it.
And it's beautiful, though.
And that's the gift.
Yeah.
Everything else around that in which is being set up is out of order, causing a great deal of stress, argument, and dissatisfaction, and taking a lot of time, right? So it's what I call unnecessary suffering. And the nervous system doesn't like it. And what we often do, our culture sanctifies, well, why don't you do substance? Why don't you do lifestyle choices? Because you're going to numb and not enjoy the discomfort of that stressor, perceived threat, when really, actually, that's not my job.
I love that.
Right.
I love the idea of why someone may seek substance, person, thing, place, whatever that is, because of an incongruency in their order in their family system.
Yes.
And I think that if you're hearing this, like, from what I just learned, you already know, right? It's in there.
It is. And there can be, and there can be grief and sadness. We can be 50, 60, 70-year-old people and say, my mother never loved me, and that is why my life. Well, I can go in and say, you didn't ultimately, although we would wish that, and my original research was in attachment trauma, right? All of the what happens to the brain, when we're young, up to the age of, 2 years, and we're not getting the love that as a mammalian infant we need. How do we adapt around neglect, abuse, abandonment? How do we actually do these things? And it's not an easy journey.
Right.
But the other piece around it is, but I got life. And who is to say in the bigger picture that how I had to adapt around that doesn't give me better skill sets to adapt in life?
Sure.
Because I still don't know, and I'm a parent, I don't know if I've prepared my children for this great big thing called life by loving and being there for them. Do they have better skills to survive this strange thing called life and how it shapes us all the time? Then the parent is like, hey, you just get on with it. Because we see these children have incredible gifts at times.
Right.
It's not all, hey, the bad, the ugly or whatever.
Sure.
It can move forward in different ways, right? We just have to quickly get in, support how individual community can say, hey, we can actually take what can feel like interesting fates and forces, and then we can actually convert it. Because life is very powerful. And some of us, if I use this analogy, it's a weird one, some of us do come from interesting fates. There really is suffering back there.
Sure.
Right? But it's like life wants to go through this stream, if we call it a stream, and be converted through, like, what do they call hydroelectric power, right? Somebody comes along and says, well, okay, that's that stream of life, and I am actually going to convert that very potently, very powerfully, and so that the next generation, or I do an upgrade. We don't have the whole system going that, hey, my dad used to beat people. My dad would actually be violent. Okay, well, I just shout at my children. Okay, well, that's called an upgrade. Let's make sure that the next generation, right, we don't beat, we don't shout, right?
Yeah.
But that's movement.
Sure.
Right, and that shouting, that beating, okay, well, that's how, if you think a beating was rough, well, hey, they used to round up people and kill them, right? So, how do we take those traits that could actually come from violence, could come from actually, like, hey, unless you kill, you'll be killed.
Right.
Right? Those kids growing up in Ukraine, then they're not sitting around in Sunday school right now.
Oh.
No. So what's going to happen with that generational? They're the generation. That's the trauma. Russia invaded. What's that going to start looking like right? Because there's missing dads, there may be missing siblings. Not everybody survives that, but I do. Do I do it with guilt? Do I do it with certain degrees of sociopathology even? Because we can epigenetically go there if we want to, right? Or do I actually do it in ways that actually ultimately, through the generations, or even in who I am, could get converted into life, right?
I think the beautiful thing for me in this conversation, and if you're listening, is that the essence of what she's talking about is you get to choose what you want to pull forward.
Yes.
When you look back and honor the people that are from before you.
Right.
You get to upgrade, as the example that she just gave. You get to make those decisions based on you. And you also get to go within yourself and feel what's incongruent.
Right.
Because then you know, like there's some things that in our conversation, and even in a conversation I have with my own mom, if she watches this, I'm probably in trouble.
Always the mother, right? Always mother.
But the thing is that out of order, and I knew it that I was out of order, and it sat weird with my system, and I felt the weirdness in my system, but never was able to put my finger on it.
Right.
But also there are things that I want to pull forward to my children and that I want to bring down to my children. I get the option.
Yes, you do.
And so do you. And that's really what she's saying from a research-based perspective is that you absolutely, if I'm quoting you correctly and paraphrasing, from a research-based perspective that you get to choose who and what you decide to become based on what you want to take forward and what you want to express and how do you want to do that.
Right. And then it becomes interesting that the actual traumatic event doesn't be the dominant narrative. Life becomes the dominant narrative, right? You know, truly you can get a group of people and we all, when we listen, and it's fascinating who we are, where we come from, the deep stories. And Oklahoma has tribal stories.
Yeah.
It's got indigenous stories. We've got stories of immigrants coming in. We've got an interesting history here in Oklahoma. The land itself has an interesting story, right? So for life to move forward, to thrive, how we have our own personal narrative and what we're going to do with that, how we also have to do and honor community, because it seems to stay connected. Once you understand it within self, it really does lend itself to go into community on some level. It really does. It binds us, heals us, and brings us back. But if I think about, again, and obviously as a trauma clinician the narratives of trauma, you can imagine over the years I've heard, right? And I'm constantly validating really one horrible generational like incest and sexual abuse, and the way that parents can be heinous, right? And not all children do survive their childhoods, right? We know this, right? So I don't have a rainbow and unicorn construction of parents either, right? You only have to work with DHS and work with clinical agencies that I've done. You will know that. But if you also understand and you can look at somebody, particularly if they've got to the stage that they did survive their childhood, and I always preface that, if you're working with minors, in my field, you're like, hey, your parents may not be safe right now, right? And maybe if we can get you through childhood and you've got enough developmental, emotional, psychological, and neurological prefrontal cortex, right, we can then actually begin the journey that you got the best thing from your parents possible, and that's called life, right? And now that's your fate. And how do we move that forward, right? And then these gorgeous, these unique journeys that, because it's touching my heart, this narrative of how you could feel that you wanted to honor your father, you wanted to carry something forward that he had set in motion. But it had to be done in a way that your nervous system says, but Dad, I'll do it like this, because if I try and do it like that, I'll get too big. And then I'll lose you, Dad. I won't feel you.
Right.
Right. And then I'm not going to honor And then my children can't see me so clearly because I won't be there for them. Right?
I love that.
Right. I really, we want to show up, right?
Right.
Right. And bring that there. And that's, it touches me that actually in listening to you talk, I think your mother, if she did watch this podcast, would actually have my son. Right? Right.
I think that as we begin to bring that to conclusion, she put a perfect period there a second ago where she said that you take the compilation of all of those things and how you are able to put them together in a correct, conducive, and concurrent to your nervous system function. And that is what's called life. And you did this.
Yes.
And it was a beautiful moment when you said that, because that's it, right?
Yeah.
Is it's like the beauty of you were given this life and this today. You have worked with someone like yourself to help highlight the things and put the things behind that maybe don't need to be seen or have been worked through. But to be able to move forward with this thing and blessing that we call life and tomorrow and the rest of today and the future, and how can I frame that and what does that look like?
Right. And I'm very pragmatic. I mean, you really have to hack the central nervous system at times so that it can agree to that. Because often the brain has lived a narrative for so long, and it could be a generational narrative. Right, we'll never go to, we're stupid, or we should stay poor, right? Whatever the belief is. So if you clinically work with this, or if you work in group environments, which I think the potency of the work of generational trauma is not only do you have the people in the environment, right? So you've got 15 or 20 people. You don't. You've got all the elders.
500 per person.
Oh yeah,
right?
you've got, and everybody is like, hey, energy wants to come, life wants to come through. So somebody could be saying, well, I just want to resolve the fact that I hate my dad because he was an alcoholic and he wasn't there for me. Well, I can assure you that person is giving voice to a fate that somewhere whether in the immediacy, we've all got in our family system, right? We've known hatred, we've known like, how do I carry my dad or my mother in me, right? When I still don't know if I love them, right? And so these journeys are not, we earn life, don't we? Yeah. We earn it, right? And so for some of us, that earning is like, I really have to be the one in the generation that finally says, I can carry my mother in me, right? Mirror, mirror on the wall. Yes, I am my mother after all. And I'm the best of that moving forward. I'm taking a fate that for me came out of, it really did start out of the First World War in Europe and in the immediacy of the Second World War, right? So I think a personal journey for me studying, having the lived experience of like, wait a minute, how am I so caught up in a war that took place before I was born, but shaped everything in the family narrative of who we were and how we lived, right? And then how do I take that journey, earn life with carrying that through and with me, and the culture and the privilege of who I am and wherever I come from, and then notice how that is informing my life, right? And it's constant, right? It's a constant journey, right?
I love it, and it is, and you're accurate in so many levels. And why she's so valuable sitting here today is because she's been willing to get in front of those people that have experienced those traumas and what that means to them as they've moved along, and been able to help them. Right. And I would, if you're interested in this, and this has been a great moment for me. I got some journaling to do. If you're interested in this, and this is something that resonates with you, I have asked Dr. Barnum to hold a class, a group session here at the office. The date will be somewhere down here because we haven't selected it, but I've got a series of dates. What I'd like you to know is that she's an expert at doing this. to the group setting where we can build power together, I'll be there. I'm an emotional guy, so you'll see me cry probably.
Yeah, you will.
And that's fine. I want to give you an invite personally. If you're in the Tulsa area and you would like to attend Dr. Barnard's generational workshop, is that what I would call it there?
I always like to think of it as a repair of generational trauma. So it's reparative.
Yeah, I like
right?
that.
It's reparative, and that it really is, well, not just your life changing, but I think the ancestors look back and say, oh, finally, whew, right? So it has deep potency and transformational, I even say to people, it's like condensing years of therapy into one afternoon or one day. Because when you're sitting exponentially to do this work collectively, the work is amplified. It becomes a process. You'll even see people do work on your behalf because you'll be like, that's a theme that's in my family system that I don't know how to resolve because I'm so carrying it. And here it is being worked through in the group that I'm part of. And I get for the first time to sit and observe it as opposed to just constantly, chronically living in it. Right? So it's in deep service, everybody who attends, at whatever level, even in observation, has a profound shift. And I would say even in the DNA, I think it literally is, because I'm interested in speeding up clinical therapy. I don't believe we have 15 years to do psychoanalysis. Trauma comes in quick, trauma can go out quick. And that's the mindset that I hold.
You want some of that. Let's do this together because I would like to work through it myself. But let's do this together as a group of people that are really looking to be congruent within their physiology, looking for what we want to move towards. And I mean, everything in my life is about excluding things that aren't going to serve me and keeping the things that are serving me. And this is a thing that needs to happen for me and probably for you, so that I can serve more, be more, do more. I have to know what's congruent to me and honor the people that came before me.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for a powerful.
Yeah, thank you.
She's way smarter than me, and so I'm probably going to have to re-listen to some of these things because it was so content rich. But that just gives you a sampling of what that class could be like and what that repair workshop could be like.
And it will be very experiential. So it's not a lecture.
Nice.
It really is how the nervous system, how we do this, right? And the work came out of, it's a lot of family system work that's came into Europe and America in the 1950s, but it has a piece that came from looking at how indigenous tribes always collectively honored and knew that most trauma had to be resolved because it began generationally, right? So the work will it will be confidential, right? It does maintain that piece. And very quickly the narratives get dropped and we can move into the experiential expression of what is needed for the resolution to take place. Right, so it's not me just talking, right?
Yeah.
It will be very much how we can feel the difference. Like, for example, to actually stand right now, if we were in group process, I would actually have somebody represent your father and literally stand behind you right now, so that you could feel your father bigger than you, behind you, and that you would actually feel that in your nervous system, right? As magical as that can sound, but the nervous system gets it very quickly, right? And then for that is the reality that my nervous system now knows and can reference. I'm in right order.
I love I'm sorry, I keep going.
Right.
But when you walk out of my office, I hope that you feel different. I hope you're physiology and your nervous
Yes.
system is functioning different.
Yes.
And I love that when we, because
Yes.
I've been in therapy and it is different when I exit it, but I love
Yes.
the idea of this focused neurophysiology therapy where I'm
That's
changing
right.
my nervous system.
And I want your soma, your body to live it differently. I engage the lived experience, like see it, feel it, now know it. Now know it. What is that like? How do you know that? What is the tone? What is the weight? What in this moment is that knowing that you can now go back and reference, as opposed to the abandonment, the narratives, because they're no longer true.
Yeah.
They're no longer true. This is a new reality. And to store that into the new lived experience and the memory systems going forth. And that's for transformation. We can't just think it. We have to then encode it. And it's got to come in at a sensory motor level. It's got to come in the way that the neurology gets a buy-in, so the mind can then collaborate. Right. And the spirit binds it.
If you miss this course, you're missing out, because I will be there and I'm looking forward to the result, the neurological result that I embody within myself post-course. I hope you join us. The date will be dropped. We'll send some advertising out and do the marketing thing, but I get lucky enough to be able to have these types of conversations.
Well,
and
thank
so
you.
thank you guys for tuning
Thank
in.
you. It was a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
But that was
Thank you.
great.
Right.
Thank you again. We'll see you next time.